Hello and welcome to Connect. I'm your host, Randy Shabilo. On today's show, we'll have Mike Couros and Dr. Jacqui Fleury talking about mental health and the entrepreneur. As always, we'd like to connect with you.
Tweet us at connect_YXZ. Follow us on Facebook to watch new and past interviews, or email connectyxz@gmail.com with any future guest or topic suggestions.
Mental health and the topic about it has become prevalent in our city, and I've asked two of our guests, Mike Couros and Dr. Jacqui Fleury, give us some insight into mental health and the entrepreneur and things that we see in the community and the resources that we have, some of the solutions that are available. So thank you both for coming here, making some time for us today. Mike, maybe start with you and a little bit about your background and your experience, what you've seen with the entrepreneurial world.
Sure. My main line of business basically is group benefits. So I deal a lot with employee ends. And what we've basically seen over the last little while is an increased prevalence of mental health issues among the employees. But we've always seen that there hasn't been that much support for entrepreneurs. So what we did is we did a little bit of research and try to take a hold of the subject and take a look at what sort of prevalence there was in the entrepreneurial community for mental health issues. So Dr. Jacqui and I did some studying, some research, and we found that roughly 72% of all entrepreneurs have mental health issues, as compared to about 20% of the regular population. And we found that statistic actually staggering. Entrepreneurs, when they're starting out on new businesses, they have things like uncertainty, stress, anxiety, impression management, social isolation, all these things that they're working up against when you're actually, and you've got bad eating habits, you've got sleep patterns that are interrupted, you have lack of exercise. So a lot of these things add up. And we've also found that close to 30% of business startups actually fail because of the mental state of the founder, right? So we found that pretty interesting stuff. So what we've done is we've gone out and we're speaking to large groups about mental health in the entrepreneur and seeing if there's a reaction, seeing if there's things that we can say to help or help them find resources to help them while they're going through the process of either startup or continuing of an existing business.
So these are varying ages, I would think. I mean, someone could be 50 years old and starting a business and an entrepreneur in that mindset.
You're right.
So are there differences with someone who's got a family or established, or a grandparent, or someone who has life's challenges in the mix as well as that?
Well, the research really hasn't divided people in those categories, but what it does say is that entrepreneurs are predisposed to mental illness because the fact they're entrepreneurs. They bring uncertainty into their lives, they bring stress and they bring anxiety into their lives. And as a result, it's not the same as actually going to a steady job, to steady work to get a steady paycheck, where you have all sorts of benefits and pensions and group insurance. It's a lot different than that. The people that are insured probably least are the entrepreneurs. While they make sure they take care of their staff, they don't take care of themselves as much. So it doesn't break down along lines. It breaks down along mentality and somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur. So we find it very, very fascinating, and we've experienced that ourselves. We've had closed door meetings with entrepreneurs and basically say everything you said is actually correct, right? We've experienced all of these things, and we don't really have resources or anybody to talk to about them.
Is that what you're seeing with as a group benefits person? Do you see a lot of that with the people that you're networking with and speaking and representing with their staff versus them as the entrepreneur and business owner?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is two different types of situations occur. We have the employees that have resources and can access resources a little more ably than the entrepreneurs can. And they're more willing to access those resources than the entrepreneur. Part of the impression management sort of is the idea that entrepreneurs don't want to seem like they're weak. So what the problem becomes is if they're battling depression or anxiety, they're doing it by themselves, not wanting to let their partners or their spouses or their employees know that they're actually battling through this themselves. So even though there's still a stigma when it comes to mental illness, there's even more of a stigma when it comes to people who are entrepreneurs, because they can't talk to really anybody because they're afraid they're going to let the bag out and people won't trust the company they're representing. See, the entrepreneurs tie their identity into their companies, right? The company is the individual and the individual is their company. And if you think that the individual is sick, you might get the impression that the company is sick as well. And people don't want to do that. So as a result, they mainly remain silent about the issue.
So it still comes back to that stigma associated with the perception.
That's right.
Of either one of those. Dr. Fleury, maybe I'll jump in with you then. What do you see in your practice, and how did you come to recognize a lot of these issues that you're identifying now?
Well, in my practice, I've dealt with stress and the effects of stress, in amongst other health conditions, but a lot of physical ailments have their root in stress and the ability to handle stress. And essentially, stress is anything that causes your body to respond or to react. And I happen to have worked with a lot of, we'll say, type A personalities over the years. And those are the ones, obviously, that are comfortable enough seeking help. There's a lot of people out there, as Mike was saying, that don't seek the help. They either don't recognize themselves as having an option to get that help, or there may also be the sense of, well, what can I really do about it anyway, right? Especially if they think the only option is medication for their stress or their anxiety or depression. So over the years, what I've seen is using integrated care and modalities within that care that you can actually shift a person's ability to buffer the effects of stress, and they find that their moods improve and their ability to cope with stress improves. So that's where my passion lies, is in being able to educate, in particular, the entrepreneur. This can apply to anybody in stressful situations, but in this situation, the unique population of entrepreneurs where they are really focusing on reputation management, which is, we don't want anybody to know that we're suffering. And so for these people, being able to help them understand that what you're experiencing is actually modifiable, which means that there's things you can do that can positively impact your ability to handle the stress.
So if someone watching were to say, well, I'm fine, but those immediate family members or maybe some of the staff might say, gosh, there's a little bit of a quick temper there, there's some eating disorders that I'm witnessing, or weight gain or weight loss maybe. How would someone watching be able to not self-identify, but just maybe be more attuned to what's going on with their own body and that they might have some issues?
Well, certainly self-identifying is, it typically, people will recognize themselves in a list of symptoms. So they might recognize that, they're not getting a full night's sleep, or that they've got, irritable bowel, like gas and bloating all the time, or chronic heartburn, or they may find that the things that never used to bother them are now starting to bother them. They're not handling their life circumstances as well. They may recognize, physical, like skin issues, or they may notice that their interest in life has diminished. So typically, when given that list of symptoms, people will usually identify with that and go, yeah, actually that does sound like me. And then being able to say, here are some things that you can do to help regain that resiliency or that ability to cope with your environment. So most people will self-identify. They may not admit it, but they,
I was just going to ask
within themselves, they'll think to themselves, "Wow, that does sound like me."
So, Mike, if I was to ask, we've had a number of conversations over the years. If there's things like ego, if there's things of denial, at what point do you start to say, "Gosh, maybe there is something that I should get a conversation happening with a professional"?
I think what ends up happening is when things start to fall apart, and they might fall apart slowly, but they start gradually getting worse. Maybe, I think the first thing you look at is your relationships, the relationships you have with your spouse, the relationship you have with your children, maybe a partner or a coworker or your employees. If those start going sour, if all of a sudden everybody else becomes difficult in your life, it's sometimes important to look back and say, maybe you're the one who's becoming difficult. Maybe you're the one who's not handling it well. There is an ego that's involved in here, and a lot of people don't want to talk about this because It is embarrassing to some people because of the stigma around mental illness, but the reality is it exists. And a lot of people that are those entrepreneurs are really prone to it and even subject to it. But I think that's a good starting place, is if your relationships are starting to sour around you. Also, if there's things that you can't control, for instance, if business is off, business is getting bad, business is slow, etc., things that could be also triggers as well that could trigger a stressful or an anxious time. All entrepreneurs go through that. Both Dr. Jacqui and I are entrepreneurs. We've had those issues where you're finding a company, you're founding a company, and you have those sleepless nights because you wonder how you're going to make payroll. You wonder if you're going to make enough sales in the upcoming months. You're wondering about a deal or something that may change the complexion of your company. So that's why we relate to it, and that's why we're able to talk to it with entrepreneurs, because we're both entrepreneurs ourselves. And that's why this fascinated us, because I found it in my practice, Dr. Jacqui found it in her practice, and we just felt there was enough information out there now, slowly but surely, that this was the proper time to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, I guess, if an entrepreneur has to start from the ground up with a concept and worries about where the next sale is coming and will I have the product available and will the staff show up, there's that stress, but there's also stress on the other end when they're successful and I can't keep up, or my shipments are late and I don't have enough staff and I can't meet production deadlines. Where do you help find and identify that happy medium between not enough and too much?
Well, actually, that's an interesting point, because I say there's only two problems in business: not enough business, or too much business. And if you don't take care of the second problem, you'll end up with the first problem again. So those are things. It's this management, this constant juggling, where you've got to have enough employees to make sure that they're busy and that you can pay them, but they're not overworked, right? And in periods of slow times, what do you do with those employees? Do you lay them off? Do you keep them on? Do you keep paying them even though the money's not coming in? Those are decisions that are made on a regular basis by every entrepreneur in this city. And it's tough to make that decision. And ultimately, that never-ending ebb and flow of business eventually gets to you in your mind. It gets into your mindset, because there is no right answer, right? What is the ideal number of employees you should have? There's never a right answer to that. You either have too many or you don't have enough, and you're constantly battling that. And as a result, what tends to happen is everybody's out there in the physical world doing their world, but the battle rages inside your head. So as a result, it causes tremendous stress and tremendous anxiety. So it's a great question, Randy, but the reality is there's no real good answer for it. People just have to be self-aware they're actually going through this stuff.
We're going to take a short break, come back with Mike Couros and Dr. Jacqui Fleury. We are identifying some mental health issues, and we'll come back with some solutions. Stay with us.